Hi, it's Hazel. Welcome back to my channel. Again, I'll begin by apologizing for this hoarse and croaky voice. I have been fighting a head cold, chest cold for a couple of weeks now, it seems. And it just seems like I've got to keep moving. I've got to keep doing things. So anyway, apologies for that. I am starting a new project today that I hope will turn into a series. And I thought that I would hope that you tune into it, simply because I think that you probably have these supplies on hand. What I have here in front of me is a fabric covered photo album. It is gigantic. The cover is 13 inches tall by 10 and 7/8 wide. Now, I got, and it's in mint condition. The corners are perfect. It's never been used. And I paid $1 for it. Now, the appeal, I mean, this maybe isn't the greatest pattern in the world, but it is fabric. It is in good condition. And I love the maroon color. So I grabbed it. Not at the time knowing what I was going to do with it. Now, I won't be able to get the whole thing on here, so you just have to trust me on this, I guess. The pages themselves are 12.5 by almost 9. So clearly that is a problem if a person wants to use 12 by 12 paper on it. Now you're thinking, oh, this is really not that attractive. Well, the reason I used it, and I don't know if you can see here, is a patch. Because of course 12 by 12 isn't big enough. The reason I love this thing is because it's ring bound, which means that I can take each page out and don't have to worry about, having some sort of a barrier sheet in between pages to keep from gobbing materials all over, pages below. So that is definitely a plus. I thought in the beginning that this will become an art journal, and the beauty of it is that I can, like I say, take out a page at a time, work on it, landscape or portrait, and it's great. What I haven't told you about this album is that it is what, I don't know, around here, back in the day, we would have called a magnetic photo album. So it's got that sheet, that clear sheet that you would have inserted pictures behind. And I mean, photo albums that I actually used back in the day turned yellow with age. So I don't, and this stuff got crackly and dry. Excuse me. I don't know if the reason this is so pristine is because it was never used. However, let me just take one page out. Oh, I always take two. It's easy enough to remove this stuff. And again, I don't know if, and I'm sure you can't tell, but there is a bit of a diagonal line on the plastic that maybe would prevent it from being reused. Sorry for the noise. To prevent it from being used as we do acetate. But obviously I'm not throwing them out for the time being. So this has a bit of, it's not really tacky, but I assumed that it would not take medium well. So what I did, well, maybe a week or so ago, was begin covering some of the pages with things that, or with papers, either that I didn't care for, or that had a definite purpose to them. So this is scrapbooking paper. Again, I'm altering my patches up here on this page. This is dark stuff with a skull on it. Not likely to use that. Can't ever see myself being a camo girl. This is just, I think this came from a brown paper bag. See, not great adhesion there. This is Painter's, no, it might have just been thin brown paper. This is a tissue from a pair of Birkenstocks, and I like the creases, and I like the effects you can get with tissue paper. Then, and I'm sure you cannot see this because it's white on white, I began covering pages with art paper. And I can't obviously bring them all into shot, but things like this Canson watercolor paper, 140 pounds, again 9x12, so a patch was required. This is mixed media paper, again 9x12. This was $1 or a thrift store purchase. It's just drawing paper, so it's only 55 pounds, and it would not probably do very well being wet. I do have scrapbooks. Remember back in the day? Well, Jennifer clearly had a scrapbook, and that was basically newsprint. And I think anyone who's old enough, excuse me, remembers sticking stuff into a scrapbook. And now we do junk journals. I do have other pads or coil bound books. This is a sketch book, 11x14, so no patching required here. Acid free, medium weight, lightly textured. And again, when it says sketch, you can be pretty sure they don't want you wetting them. Another scrapbook. And then this is my biggest pad of watercolor paper, cold press, 30 pages, 12x18, 140 pounds. So that's just to show you the sorts of things that I had. I didn't rush out to buy them. I had them on hand, and I just wanted to use a variety of papers to cover these base pages. Now, I guess a more organized person than me would have made a pencil note in the margin as to which was which. But again, you know, sometimes it's just more important to play than it is to do that. Now, I'm going to get this out of the way for the time being because it is risking the camera, my desk, my whole thing. So, back to the actual sheet. You may, if you have a good memory or have one of these on hand, you will notice the diagonal line in it. You can't see, but I can, that as I touch it, I'm leaving sort of matte type marks. So clearly something is happening to that surface as I touch it. So what I thought I would do before I turned on the camera today was do some page prep. And this time I did make a note. So in this case, I rubbed off the finish just with a paper napkin. Now this is dry brushing with acrylic paint that is, my goodness, as old as the hills. You don't want to know how old this paint is. Let's just say more than 25 years. So obviously it's important to use it. And green, again, I used a dry brush technique, and and even though this is kind of damp now because I washed it out, this is just a sponge brush, probably a 3-inch. Yeah, 3-inch brush. And as far as sophistication of tools, it's about one step up fingers. So again, there's not a huge investment there. There is there's accessibility to those tools, and they do manage to cover a surface with paint. And if you forget to wash it out, at least you don't feel so bad about wrecking it. Now this was dry brush, and I kind of didn't really like this big glob of green here, but I continued to, like these narrower, darker marks is where I pounced with the paint. Again, I wasn't looking for total coverage, but I did want to do an experiment and see if this surface was going to resist paint, and it doesn't. So then this side, I did no prep to the surface. So I used a different color of paint. And again, this is almost without exception. I will point out the exceptions. This is just craft acrylic paint. It's affordable. It is pretty highly pigmented, and it is quick drying, which is a plus. Now, the reason I went ahead and prepped a bunch of these sheets is because if this, in fact, becomes a series where, you know, maybe once a week I'm working in this art journal, and because my phone doesn't have a pause button, and because I don't have the ability to splice together pieces of video, I'm sure it's possible, I just don't have the skill set, I thought it would be important to have, you know, surfaces ready to go. Now, I don't have the same aversion to white that some people do, but I think there is a benefit. And again, if you decide to craft along with me, number one, you'll probably find one of these photo albums, if not in your own house, then certainly at a thrift store, because they are everywhere. I don't know if you'll be as lucky as I was to find a ring-bound one. Most of them are coil-bound. Anyway, sorry. The reason I thought I was talking about white. I don't have an aversion to white, because white definitely has a place in this world and in the art world. But I just know that it's less intimidating to come to something that has something on it. So just like the writer is intimidated by a blank piece of paper in their typewriter or a blank screen on their computer, likewise, artists are often intimidated by the whiteness, the stark, the pristine quality of a new page, a new canvas, a new whatever. And again, I have a certain amount of that coursing through my veins as well. If I've paid good money for a hand-bound sketchbook with really nice paper, it takes some guts or wild abandon to make those first marks, because especially in a bound book, I'm not about to rip those pages out. So it does take a bit of something to just get in there and do it. So that's what these pages, this is the purpose I hope they serve for me and for you as well if you choose to go along. Now you can see that because I was doing a dry brush technique, I did not wash my big foam brush in between colors. And I like that some of the green carried over, and you can tell the order in which I did these sheets. So we'll put that aside. Then, what did I do next? I might have done this one next. So then I thought, well, I can combine colors. I don't have to be a one-color girl. So on this one, I used a, it probably was called chocolate brown or something. Again, El Cheapo craft paint. And spun gold. And then after the fact, I used a natural sponge. Again, this is moist now because I had to get the color out of it before it dried rock solid. I dipped this into the turquoise paint and did some mark making with that. Now, typically a natural sponge would not come in a cube like this, but I cut this chunk off for my daughter. And she did not follow my footsteps, so I got all those things back. Excuse me. You'll notice that compared to a synthetic sponge, a natural sponge is a lot more porous. It has a variety of sizes of the holes, and I didn't take the time to look for my actual sponges, you know, the ones that are sort of shaped. They're not angular like this, for sure. Anyway, I used that again in a pouncing way. Where the paint is thicker is where either I began the process or I went back into it. So there's that. So already you can see that there's the beginning of some sort of a composition. I didn't, because this was my very first, motion on after I had dribbled. And again, I used very little paint, and I didn't waste any by putting it on a palette or a disposable palette or anything like that. I did perhaps a pea-sized drop of paint in a couple of places. And that very first motion was very deliberate, and it left kind of a harsh line. And I didn't like that, so I just kept, working at it to try to soften that edge. Again, it's not the end of the world. This is only step one. I happen to believe that the diagonal lines in this paper are a good thing, because this almost looks like a stamped effect. So, a lot is said and done and invested in mark making, and excuse me, and maybe a fisherman's friend is called for. A lot of effort and supplies go into mark making and texturizing and aging and all of that stuff. So forgive me if you hear me working this lozenge around. So to have those built-in marks, like here, it kind of looks like a man's tweed. I like that. On this side, I think this was the last thing I had done. I just had some, and this, okay, I said that most of this paint was cheap craft paint. This was actually a fluid acrylic by Golden called, it's across the room. I think it's called Deep Violet or something, fairly transparent. But other than a couple errant marks there, I just basically went in the direction off the diagonal. I'm so sorry. And again, the page is not white. It's laid a foundation of color, and it can go anywhere from here. This one was kind of wild and crazy. The yellow on here is diarylide yellow, golden color, again, fluid acrylic. I don't know if there's a pure spot here, maybe this. Well, hard to tell, maybe that. Anyway, this is not a color that I'm especially fond of. But when I was doing landscape painting and so on, yellow is sort of a color that you need. And it's one of the basics. So I covered the whole substrate with the yellow, and again in a dry brush technique. And then I added a cheap red. And then I thought, well, okay, why don't I add some pink? So look, I invested 50 cents in this 4-ounce bottle of Tutti Frutti. So I then added pink over it. And again, this is the most, crazy, out there thing that I prepared. But again, it's not the end of the world, because this will grow into being something. Another thing that I just want to caution you against, or tell you about, or reassure you about, is that everything that we do as artists and maybe even journal makers is most things reach a point where you think, oh my goodness, I wasted how much time and how many supplies to get to this point of ugly. And I'm here to say, don't judge, don't throw away, give it time to either grow on you, for you to see it with new eyes, or be exhibit A in another lesson learned. So part of the thing that I like here is the cross hatching. And again, because multiple colors were used, it's a good starting point. So I can collage paper over this. I can do kind of whatever I want. And you may never see this color again. It might all get covered up. Or you may see it poking through, and it'll be our secret, a reminder to you and me that ugly and out there can turn into something gorgeous if we just hang in there, trust the process, trust ourselves, and follow it where it takes us. The other side of this, and again, because this stuff dries so fast, I was able to, by the time I finished one, the other side was dry. So then I used the turquoise. And I think with this, if I'm not mistaken, boy, good memory. I believe I was still using the 4-inch brush or 3-inch foam brush. I just made swirly marks. And of course, as the paint got used up, they became lighter and they created some new marks. On this one, again, it's that golden fluid, golden deep violet, I think it's called. And I thought, okay, drop here, see what happens. So of course I'm tilting it, and I didn't spray it with water, which would have expedited the process. But I did eventually think, well, I don't want these two things, these two definite purple marks right across the thing, although I do love purple. So I just began with the sea sponge, again, pouncing, trying to break up that solid bit of color and get it to the point where, there are touches of that color throughout. And that's, by the way, another way to unify a piece. If I put a red dot of paint, or any color dot of paint, and didn't have some other color, some other place on it, or several other places on it, repeating that same color, then I guarantee that your eye would go nowhere but that one dot of color. And maybe sometimes that's the effect you want, but most of the time, to keep the eye moving through the piece, you need to repeat color. And again, these are not finished works of art by any stretch of the imagination. I think that will probably conclude what I wanted to say today, other than another thing that I'm doing in preparation. And sorry, I didn't bring any of that here, is I have begun fussy cutting oversized images. You know that as we buy and deconstruct books, or go through our own library and deconstruct books, we find images, whether they're florals or birds or animals or faces, that are far, far, far too large for the average junk journal. And it just seemed like, well, okay, that's a lost cause. But what I've begun doing in the last several days is fussy cutting and salvaging and fussy cutting images that are faces and birds and what else? Oh, vegetables and fruit and those sorts of things that will be finding their way into these collages. I intend to make this project a wild and crazy place to let go, to cut loose, to do whatever bizarro thing I feel like I want to do. I think that it will be freeing. I think that it will be fun. And I look forward to doing that. And I hope you do as well. Oh, I guess I do have something else here. So, if you've ever bought and deconstructed some of those early readers, C. Dick and Jane, blah, 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 they had a different kind of binding. Like they had thick string, which makes these big holes, and they also had giant, long-legged staplers holding them together. So anyway, I finally took one apart completely the other day, and I ended up with, because I had ripped out some pages prior to that, I had these little stubs. So I am going to be at some point gluing some of this down to some of these pages, just as another way of building texture. And you can see that some brat was actually writing all over this textbook. There's some of the original cloth that was used to bind it. So again, these things will come in handy for building texture. Oh, another thing. I don't think I've maybe used 2 pieces in the last couple of years since I started down this path, are all these sorts of things that come out of books as we deconstruct them. They are wonderful in that, number one, they're as old as the hills. They're textural. The color is typically really good. You can tell that this is probably a newer one. These where there was a lot of glue used here. This is obviously from a wide book that had a damaged spine. So there are all sorts of these little odds and ends. Oh, this is old masking tape. These, what are these things called? Header? I don't know. Don't take my word for it. These are those little fabric tabs, the top and bottom of a spine. So I intend to stop hoarding and start using these as well. You have no idea how many of these I have. So expect to see some of this. And I doubt that I would, glue it down and cover it with paint. This would probably be more like a focal point, a top layer kind of thing. So I invite you to find an album or something similar, or even just a sketchbook for that matter, or an oversized book that you want to alter, and join me on this adventure. If you can do some prep ahead of time, that would be great. It would mean that as I'm going through my process, you're going through your process. So again, think of interesting things that could be glued down that would create texture. Think of colorways that perhaps you like. Think of something that's been kicking around far too long and you want to get rid of. And that, my lovelies, is your homework for next time. In the meantime, again, I apologize for the coughing. Aren't you glad that germs aren't transmitted through YouTube? Prep some pages, gather your supplies, gather your nerve, and we are going to have some fun over the next several weeks. Fussy cutting some oversized images, it might also be a good idea, particularly if collage is part of what you intend to do. In the meantime, I will call it a day for this, and I hope you're feeling better than I am, and I hope that you stay safe and get on with your homework. See you next time. Bye-bye.